Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Thursday night edition. Sorry, Thursday night. Sunday night edition live here, accessibly live. I gotta fix that camera one of these days. God damn it. Um, Welcome to the book club reading room. I am Joel K, and this is the start of a new book here on the book club reading room. Tonight, to get us ready for the Halloween festivities, we are getting one of the best and most underrated science fiction adventure series ever by one of the leading people who wrote a tremendous amount in his life. We're talking about H.G. Wells. And tonight we begin with the introduction and the first 3 chapters of The Island of Dr. Moreau. Tonight we will be talking about Wells and some of his history, and he was one of those that did amazing things as a writer. Herbert George Wells, H.G. Wells, was born in England in 1866. His writings were extensive, both in the areas of fiction and nonfiction genre. His writings conjured early ideas of flight, the internet, atomic warfare, wireless communications. He was a certifiable genius when it comes to what he created. Like I said, he was diverse, but his novels are also known worldwide. But his nonfiction, satire, political commentary, history, and science, plus much more, made his works appreciated in all venues of learning. I want to grab something here, you guys. While I've got the page up, I got a couple things I want to show you. Now, most of you know I have a fairly decent collection of books and old classic books. Now, I've got a nonfiction book by H.G. Wells, first and last thing. Now, this very old book, it's got paper. Ha! No kidding. This was written and published in 1908. So this has been over 100 years when this was published. And what this was is his thoughts of life in general. The first things and the last things. Now, he did that, but he also did this. 2-volume set. Volumes 1 and Volume 2 of the history, outline of history. And the books are amazing in themselves. This one was updated by Wells's son in 1971, but first published back in 1920. So a lot of this was updated by his eldest son, and has been around on bookshelves for many, many years. Now, his influence, the influences of H.G. Wells, is vast. When he was alive, many of his peers and his writing at the same time, including Jules Verne, Mark Twain, the great Mary Shelley, Carl Jung, and Jonathan Swift, and many, many more. He took advantage and had knowledge of and met with many famous authors over the years he was alive, and he grew to be quite a well-known author unto himself. As I mentioned earlier, 3 things that H.G. Wells predicted in his books: Men on the Moon, email, alternate realities, and unfortunately the atomic bomb. He grew to know and understand so much in his career that it was pretty amazing. Sorry about that bump on the microphone, guys. But I think it's about time we get started with the book, and we will read the introduction and the first 3 chapters, hopefully, of The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. The introduction. On February the 1st, 1887, the Lady Vane was lost by collision with a derelict when about the latitude 1 degree south and longitude 107 degrees west. On January the 5th, 1888, that is 11 months and 4 days after my uncle, Edward Penrick, the private gentleman who certainly went aboard the Lady Vane at Callao, and who had been considered drowned, was picked up in latitude 5 degrees 3 south and longitude 101 degrees west, in a small open boat of which the name was illegible, but which is supposed to have belonged to the missing schooner Ipecacuanha. He gave such a strange account of himself that he was supposed demented. Subsequently, he alleged that his mind was a blank from the moment he has escaped from the Lady Vane. His case was discussed among psychologists at the time as a curious instance of lapse of memory consistent upon mental and physical stress. Hey gardeners, how you doing? Actually, through some psychedelics, it is talked about. He did talk and work with a few of the psychedelics that were out there. He was impeccable, and he strove forward with many things about what he was doing in his life. We're going to actually talk more about that on next Sunday. And I appreciate you joining in. Hi, how you doing? Glad to have you here. Now, the following narrative was found among his papers by the undersigned, his nephew and heir, but unaccompanied by any definitive request for publication. The only island known to exist in the region which my uncle was picked up is Noble's Island, a small volcanic islet and uninhabited. It was visited in 1891 by the HMS Scorpion. A party of sailors then landed, but found nothing living thereon except certain curious white moths, some hogs and rabbits, and some rather peculiar rats. So that this narrative is without confirmation in its most essential particular. With that understood, there seems no harm in putting this strange story before the public in accordance, as I believe, with my uncle's intentions. There is at least this much in its behalf. My uncle passed out of human knowledge about latitude 5 degrees south and longitude 105 degrees east, and reappeared in the same part of the ocean after a space of 11 months. In some way, he must have lived during that interval. It seems that a schooner called the Ipecacuanha, with a drunken captain, John Davies, did start from Africa with a puma and certain other animals aboard in 1887 of January. That the vessel was well known at several ports in the South Pacific, and that it finally disappeared from those seas. with a considerable amount of copra aboard. Sailing to its unknown fate from Banya in December 1887, a date that tallies entirely with my uncle's story. Yours, Charles Edward Prendick. This is a story by Edward Prendick. Chapter 1. In the Dinghy of the Lady Vane. I do not propose to add anything to what has already been written concerning the loss of the Lady Vane. As everyone knows, she collided with a derelict when 10 days out from Callao. The longboat, with 7 of its crew, was picked up 18 days later by the HMS gunboat Myrtle. And their story of their terrible privations had become quite as well known as far more horrible the Medusa case. But I have to add to the published story of the Lady Vane another, possibly as horrible and far stranger. It was hitherto been supposed that 4 of the men who were in the dinghy perished. But this is incorrect. I have the best of evidence for this assertion. I was one of those 4 men. But in the first place, I must state that there never were 4 men in the dinghy. The number was 3. Constance, who was seen by the captain to jump into the gig, luckily for us, and unluckily for himself, did not reach us. He came down out of the tangled ropes under the strays of the mashed bowsprit, and some small rope tangled his heel as he let go, and he hung for a moment head up down, and then fell, struck the block or spar floating in the water. We pulled him towards him, but he never came up. Daily News, March 17th, 1887. As I say, luckily for us, he did not reach us, and I might almost say luckily for himself, for we only had a small beaker of water and some sodden ship's biscuits with us, so sudden had been the alarm, so unprepared the ship for any disaster. We thought the people on the launch would have been better provisioned, though it seemed they were not. And we tried to hail them. They could not hear us, and the next morning, when it drizzled clear, which was not until past midday, we could see nothing of them. We could not stand up to look about us, because of the pitching of the boat. The 2 men who had escaped so far with me were the name Helmer, and a passenger like myself, and a seaman whose name I don't know, a short, sturdy man with a stammer. We drifted famishing, and after our water came to end, tormented by an intolerable thirst, for 8 days altogether. After the 2nd day, the sea subsided slowly to a glassy calm. It was quite impossible for the ordinary reader to imagine those 8 days. He was not, luckily for himself, anything in his memory to imagine with. After the first day, we said little to one another, and lay in our places in the boat, and stared at the horizon, or watched with eyes that grew larger and more haggard every day, the misery and the weakness gaining upon our companions. The sun became pitiless. The water ended on the 4th day, when we were already thinking strange things and saying them with our eyes. But it was, I think, the 6th before Helmer gave voice to the thing that we all had been thinking. I remember our voices were dry and thin, so we bent towards one another and spared our words. I stood out against with all my might, was rather for scuttling the boat and perishing altogether among the sharks that followed us. But when Helmer said that he was accepted that she should drink, the sailor came around to him. I would not draw lots, however, And in the night, the sailor whispered that Helmer again and again, and I sat in the bows of my clasped knife in my hand, though I doubt if I had the stuff in me to fight. And in the morning, I agreed with Helmer's proposal, and we handed halfpence to find the odd man. The lot fell upon the sailor, but he was the strongest of us, and would not abide it by attack Helmer with his hands. They grappled together and almost stood up. I crawled along the boat to them, intending to help Helmer by grasping the sailor's leg. But the sailor stumbled with a swing of the boat, and the two fell upon the gunwale and rolled overboard together. They sank like stones. I remember laughing at that and wondering why I laughed. The laugh caught me suddenly like a thing from without. I lay across one of the thwarts for I know not how long, thinking that if I had the strength I would drink seawater and madden myself die quickly. And even as I lay there, I saw, with no more interest than I had been a picture, a sail come up towards me on the skyline. My mind must have been wandering, and yet I remember all that happened quite distinctly. I remember how my head swayed with the sea, and the horizon with the sail above it danced up and down. But I also remembered as distinctly as I had persuasion that I was dead, and that I thought what a just it was that they should come too late by such a little to catch me in my body. For an endless period, as it seemed to me, I lay with my head on the thwart, watching the schooner, as was a little ship, schooner rigged fore and aft, come out of the sea. She kept tacking to and fro in a widening compass, for she was sailing dead into the wind. It never entered my mind, to attempt to attract attention, and I do not remember anything distinctly after the sight of her side until I found myself in a little cabin aft. There, a dim half memory of being lifted upon the gangway, and of the big round countenance covered with freckles and surrounded with big red hair staring at me over the bulwarks. I also had a disconnected impression of a dark face with extraordinary eyes close to mine, but that I thought I was a nightmare until I met it again. I fancy I recollected some stuff being poured in between my teeth, and that is all. Chapter 2. The Man Who Was Going Nowhere. The cabin in which I found was small and rather untidy. A youngish man with flaxen hair and bristly straw-colored mustache and a dropping nether lip was sitting and holding my wrist. For a minute, we stared at each other without speaking. He had watery gray eyes, oddly void of expression. Just then, overheard became a sound like an iron bedstead being knocked about, and the low, angry growling of some large animal. At the same time the man spoke. He repeated this question, "How do you feel?" I think I said I felt all right. I could not recollect how I had got there. He must have seen the question in my face, for my voice was inaccessible to me. "You were picked up in a boat starving. The name on the boat was the Lady Vane, and there were spots of blood on the gunwale." At the same time my eye caught my hand, so thin that it looked almost skin-purse full of loose bones. All the business of the boat came back to me. "Have some of this," he said, and gave me a dose of some scarlet stuffed ice. It tasted like blood, It made me feel stronger. "You're in luck," he said, "to get picked up by a ship with a medical man on board." He spoke with a slobbering articulation with the ghost of a lisp. "What ship is this?" I asked slowly, hoarse from the long silence. "It's a little trader from Arica and Callao. I never asked where she came in the beginning. Out of land of born fools, I guess. I'm a passenger myself from Africa. A silly ass who owns his captain too, named Davies. He's lost his certificate or something. You know the kind of man. Calls the thing Ipicana. Of all silly infernal names. Though when there's such a sea without any wind, she certainly acts accordingly." Then the noise overheard began again, a snarling growl, and the voice of a human being together. Then another voice telling some heaven-forsaken idiot to desist. "You were nearly dead," said my interlocutor. "It was very near thing indeed. But I've put some stuff into you now. Notice your arm sore? Injections. You've been insensible for nearly 30 hours. I thought slowly. I was distracted now by the yelping of a number of dogs. "Am I eligible for solid food?" I asked. "Thanks to me," he said. "Even now the mutton is boiling." "Yes," I said with assurance. "I could eat some mutton." "But," he said with a momentary hesitation, "you know I am dying to hear how you came to be alone in that boat." Damn that howling! I thought I detected a certain suspicion in his eyes. He suddenly left the cabin, and I heard him in a violent controversy with someone, who seemed to me talk gibberish in response to him. The matter sounded as though it ended in blows, but I thought my ears were mistaken. Then he shouted at the dogs, and returned to the cabin. "Well," he said in the doorway, "you were just beginning to tell me." I told him my name was Edward Prendick, and how I had taken to natural history as a relief from the dullness of my comfortable independence. He seemed interested in this. "I've done some science myself. I did my biology at the University College, getting out of the ovary of the earthworm and the radial of a snail, and all that. Lord, it's 10 years ago. But go on, tell me about the boat." He was evidently satisfied with the frankness of my story, which I told in concise sentences enough, for I felt horribly weak. And when it finished, he reverted once to the topic of natural history and his own biological studies. He began to question me closely about Tottenham Court Road and Gower Street. Is Capitalism still flourishing? What a shop that was! He had evidently been a very ordinary medical student and drifted incontently to the topic of the music halls. He told me some anecdotes. "Left it all," he said, 10 years ago. How jolly it used to be. I made a young ass of myself, played myself out of 21. I dare say it's all different now. But I must look up that darn cook and see what he's done with your mutton." A growling overheard was renewed so suddenly and with so much savage anger that it startled me. "What was that?" I called after him, but the door had closed. He came back again with boiled mutton, and I was so excited by the appetizing smell of it I forgot the noise of the beast that had troubled me. After a day of alternate sleep and feeding, I was so far recovered as to be able to get from my bunk to the scuttle and see the green seas trying to keep pace with us. I judged the schooner was running before the wind. Montgomery, that was the name of the flaxen-haired man, came again as I stood there, and I asked him for some clothes. He lent me some duck things of his, for those I had worn in the boat had been thrown overboard. They were rather loose on me, and I was large and long in limbs. He told me casually that the captain was 3 parts drunk in his cabin. As I assumed the clothes, I began asking some questions about the destination of the ship. He said the ship was bound for Hawaii, but that it had to land him first. Where? Said I. It's an island where I live. So far as I know, it hasn't got a name. He stared at me with another lip dropping and looked so wistfully stupid of a sudden that it came to my head that he desired to avoid my questions. I had the discretion to ask no more. Chapter 3. The Strange Face. We left the cabin and found the man at the companion obstructing our way. He was standing on the ladder with his back to us, peering over the combing of the hatchway. He was, as I could see, a misshapen man, short, broad, and clumsy, with a crooked back and hairy neck, and his head sunk between his shoulders. He was dressed in dark blue serge, and was particularly thick, coarse black hair. I heard the unseen dogs growl furiously, and forthwith he ducked back. Coming into contact with my hand, I put out a fend him off with myself. He turned with an animal swiftness. In some indefinable way, the black face thus flashed upon me so profoundly. It was singularly deformed. A facial part projected, forming something dimly suggested of a muzzle, and the huge half-open mouth showed big white teeth as I have never seen in a human mouth. His eyes were bloodshot at the edges, with scarcely a rim of white around the hazel pupils. There was a curious glow of excitement in his face. "Confound you," said Montgomery. "Why the devil don't you get out of the way?" The black-faced man startled aside without a word. I went up upon the companion, staring at him instinctively. As I did so, Montgomery stayed at the foot of the moment. "You have no business here, you know," he said in a deliberate tone. "Your place is forward." The black-faced man cowered. "They won't have me forward," he spoke slowly, with a queer, hoarse quality in his voice. "Won't have you forward," said Montgomery in a menacing voice, "but I tell you to go." He was on the brink of saying something further, then looked up at me suddenly and followed me up the ladder. Excuse me. I had paused halfway through the hatchway, looking back, still astonished beyond measure at the grotesque ugliness of this faced creature. I had never beheld such a repulsive and extraordinary face before. And yet, if the contradiction is credible, I experienced at the same time an odd feeling that in some way I had already encountered exactly the same features and gestures that now amazed me. Afterwards it occurred to me that probably I had seen him as he was lifted aboard, and that scarcely satisfied my suspicions of a previous acquaintance. Yet how one could get a set of eyes on so singularly a face and forgotten the precise occasion passed my imagination. Montgomery's movements to me followed release of my attention, and I turned my look about me at the flush deck of the little schooner. I was already half prepared by the sounds I had heard for what I saw. Certainly I never beheld a deck so dirty. It was littered with scraps of carrots, shreds of green stuff, and indescribable filth. Fastened by chains to the mainmast were a number of grisly staghounds who were beginning to leap and bark at me, and by the mizzen a large puma was cramped in an little iron cage, far too small even to give it turning room. Farther under the starboard bulwark, there were some big haunches containing a number of rabbits, a solitary llama that was squeezed into a mere box of a cage. The dogs were muzzled by leather straps. The only human being on deck was a gaunt and silent sailor at the wheel. The patch and dirty swaggers were tense before the wind, and up aloft the little ship seemed to carry every sail it had. The sky was clear, and the sun midday down in the western sky. Long waves capped the breeze with froth, were running with us. We went past the steersman to the taffrail and saw the water come foaming under the stern and the bubbles go dancing and vanishing in her wake. I turned and surveyed the unsavory length of the ship. "Is this an ocean menagerie?" said I. "Looks like it," said Montgomery. "What are these beasts for? Merchandise? Curios? Does the captain think he's going to sell them somewhere in the South Pacific?" "It looks like it, doesn't it?" said Montgomery, and turned towards the wake again. Suddenly we heard a yelp and a volley of furious blasphemy from the companion hatchway, and the deformed man with the black face came up hurriedly. He was immediately followed by a heavy, red-haired man in a white cap. At the sight of the former, the staghounds, who had all tired of barking at me all this time, became furiously excited, howling and leaping against their chains. Lack hesitated before them, and this gave the red-haired man time to come up with him and deliver a tremendous blow between the shoulder blades. The poor devil went down like a felled ox and rolled in the dirt among the furiously excited dogs. It was lucky for him that they were all muzzled. The red-haired man gave a yelp of exultation and stood staggering, and as it seemed to me, in serious danger of either going backwards down the companion hatchway or forwards upon his victim. So soon as the second man had appeared, Montgomery had started forward. "Steady on there," he cried in a tone of remonstrance. A couple of sailors appeared on the forecastle. The black-faced man, howling in singular voice, rolled about under the feet of the dogs. No one attempted to help him. The brutes did their best to worry him, butting their muzzles against him. There was quick dance of their lithe, grave-figured bodies over the clumsy, prostrate figure. The sailors forward shouted as though it was an admirable sport. Montgomery gave an angry exclamation and went striding down the deck, and I followed him. Black-faced man scrambled up and staggering forward, going and leaning over the bulwark by the main shrouds, where he remained panting and glaring over his shoulder at the dogs. The red-haired man laughed a satisfied laugh. "Look here, Captain," said Montgomery, with his lisp a little accentuated, gripping the elbows of the red-haired man. "This won't do." I stood behind Montgomery. The captain came half round, regarded him with a dull, solemn eyes of a drunken man. "What won't do?" he said, and added, with a looking sleepily into Montgomery's face for a minute. "Blasted sawbones!" With a sudden movement, he shook his arms free, and after 2 ineffectual attempts, struck his freckled fists with his side pockets. "That man's a passenger," said Montgomery. "I'd advise you to keep your hands off him." "Go to hell," said the captain loudly. He suddenly turned and staggered towards the side. "Do what I like on my own ship," he said. I think Montgomery might have left him then, seeing the brute was drunk, but he only turned a shade paler, and followed the captain to the bulwarks. "Look you here, Captain," he said, "that man of mine is not to be ill-treated. He has been hazed ever since he came aboard." For a minute, alcoholic fumes kept the captain speechless. "Blasted sawbones" was all he considered necessary. I could see that Montgomery had one of those slow, pernicious tempers that will warm one day after a day to a white heat and never again cool to forgiveness. And I saw, too, that this quarrel had been some time growing. "The man's drunk," said I, perhaps officiously. "You'll do no good." Montgomery gave an ugly twist to his dropping lip. "He's always drunk. Do you think that excuses his assaulting his passengers?" "My ship," began the captain, waving his hand unsteadily towards the cages, was a clean ship. Now look, now. It was certainly anything but clean. "Crew," continued the captain. "Clean, respectable crew. You agreed to take the beasts. I wish I never set eyes on your infernal island. What the devil want beasts on an island like that? Then, that man of yours understood. He was a man. He was a lunatic and had no business aft. Do you think the whole damned ship belongs to you? Your sailors began to haze the poor devil as soon as he came aboard. That's just what he is. He's the devil. An ugly devil. My men can't stand him. I can't stand him. None of us can stand him, nor you either." Montgomery turned away. "You leave the man alone, anyhow," he said, nodding his head as he spoke. But the captain meant to quarrel now. He raised his voice. "And if he comes to end of the ship again, I'll cut his insides out, I tell you. Cut out his blasted insides. Who are you to tell me what I am to do? I tell you I'm the captain of this ship, captain and owner. I'm the law here, I tell you, the law and the prophets. I bargained to take the man and his attendants from Africa to bring some animals. I never bargained to carry a mad devil and a silly sawbones. Well, never mind what he called Montgomery." I saw the latter take a step forward and interposed. "He's drunk," said I. The captain began some abusive, even fouler than the last. "Shut up," I said, turning to him sharply, for I had seen the danger in Montgomery's white face. With that, I brought the downpour upon myself. However, I was glad to avert what was uncommonly near a cuffle, even at the price of the captain's drunken ill will. I do not think I have ever heard quite such vile language come in a continuous stream from any man's lips. For, though I have frequented eccentric company enough, I found some of the hard to tenure, though I am mild-tempered man. But certainly, when I told the captain to shut up, I had forgotten that I was merely a bit of human flotsam, cut off from my resources, and with my fare unpaid, a mere casual dependent upon the bounty, or speculative enterprise of the ship. He reminded me of it with considerable vigor, but at any rate, I prevented a fight. That were the first 3 chapters and the prologue to the island of Dr. Moreau. I appreciate you guys stopping in for tonight's show. As you guys might have seen or heard, we have started putting Accessibly Live, the book club reading room, on YouTube. We are in the process of trying to make this show a little bit more than it was. We will always be here live on Twitch, but we will forward this downstream to YouTube for more people to enjoy. And I appreciate everybody stopping in. Guards are forever. I appreciate you stopping in and saying hello. And I will take a look for that. I had known, I'd heard something about him doing psychedelics way back. And we'll do a little more research onto that. I'll look into it and see what I find for next week's show. We are in the process of school starting around the country, as I mentioned last week when we did the Shakespeare sonnets. There are a lot of places banning books. These are an example of what's been banned, unfortunately. Last year, by the start of last year, 4,240 titles in U.S. schools and libraries were being targeted. Appreciate the ACLU letting me use this graphic as part of it. We have got so much going on tonight. Like I said, I really do appreciate you guys coming in along for the show. Next week, we will continue with Chapter 4 here on Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. Let your friends know if they like books, if they like reading, if they like having, like what we used to do. The idea of this show has always been this. When we were all growing up, myself and you guys, going to the public library with our schools, or the school library and the school librarian or the public librarian having us gather in a circle and reading a story to us and showing us the pictures. The same general idea. But with this, we're reading full-length books in increments, because goodness knows you don't want to put up with me 8 hours reading one book. So we read 3 to 4 chapters a night, every Sunday. And we talk a little bit about the person and the author who put a lot of hard work into the stories. And so much stuff available now in public domain that this show will be a show that I hope I'll be doing for a very long time for you. And I appreciate everyone who's stopping in to watch. This is the show where you kick back, turn down the lights, and enjoy a little bit of relaxation on a Sunday night if you're watching it, or a Monday, Tuesday, whenever you're getting a chance to watch this on either here on Twitch for playback or on YouTube. Look up Joel K_OG and you will find Accessibly Live. We're getting ready to close down the show for another Sunday. I really appreciate everybody stopping in, and like we do on Thursday night, we have a final quote for the week. And this one really goes well with some of the ideas we've been reading today and what I hope to strive for. Keep away from people who try to belittle your ambitions. Small people always do that. But the really great make you feel that you too can become great. When you are seeking to bring big plans to fruition, it is important with whom you regularly associate. Hang out with friends who are like-minded and who are also designing purpose-filled lives. Similarly, be that kind of friend for your friends. Mark Twain. Samuel Clemens. Email down here, guys. Give me a yell. Let me know where you guys are watching from. It's always fun hearing from people from literally around the world. When we do our anniversary show in December, it's fun getting all these people who are viewers just starting to watch and from places around the world. It's kind of fun. And I appreciate you guys. I really do. I am Joel K. This is Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. Every single Sunday night live here on Twitch TV. And dropped over onto YouTube to see how many more people we can get enjoying the books. I am still working on something really special for you guys for Halloween week. Something very different. And if I can get away with it, it could be a lot of fun here. I'm not going to tell you what it is until we get to that area of time, and we will let you know. So keep your fingers crossed we get to do something creative. We're going to get out of here. Thank you for watching. Be well, be safe, be kind. Take care of each other, guys. There's a lot of crazy morons out there that are doing stupid things. Be a part of the good side of keeping your hand reached out to somebody when they need it. Because someday you will need it too. I'm going to get out of here. Take care, you guys. We'll see you all next week. And we'll see you Thursday night here on Twitch for Accessibly Live, the conversation station. Take care. See y'all. Bye-bye.